Please join your host, Lily, for today's news story, titled, While My Chairman Husband Was Comforting His First Love at the Hospital, Thinking I Was Still the Obedient Wife, Waiting Out Our 30-Day Divorce Period, I had already liquidated my $25 million jewelry collection and boarded a flight to escape the country. When he came home and opened the door, he collapsed at the sight. In the VIP boardroom of the Quantum Group, 2 rows of high-end leather chairs were filled by the company's aging board members. Their pensive faces awaited a historic moment for the corporation. Julian sat there, in a meticulously custom-tailored navy suit, his elegant and successful appearance the envy of many. But I knew his mind wasn't here. His eyes repeatedly darted to the phone, lying face down on the polished oak conference table, which vibrated insistently, breaking the tense silence of the merger signing ceremony. Julian glanced quickly at the screen, and I caught a glimpse of the text message from the contact labeled Chloe. "I'm so scared. The doctor said the cut is deep. It might leave a permanent scar." A bitter smile touched my lips, so faint that no one noticed. Chloe always knew how to pick her moments. She knew today was the most important day of my career, the day the tech company I had built, my brainchild, was to be officially swallowed by my husband's corporation. Julian turned to me, his voice low but laced with an undisguised urgency. "Ava, is the portfolio ready? Let me sign it quickly so we can finish. I have to leave for an emergency." I looked at the man I had loved for 10 years, the man who had once promised to protect me for a lifetime, now desperate to end things with me just to rush to another woman's side over a superficial scratch. Calmly, I pushed the thick file toward him. On the cover, in bold letters, were the words, "Merger Agreement and Senior Personnel Appointment." "Read it carefully," I said, my voice unnervingly steady. "This is the final version revised by the legal team. There are a few new clauses regarding the founding shareholders' rights. In reality, tucked between pages filled with dense, specialized terminology was a special addendum I had drafted myself the night before, the Asset Division and Divorce Agreement. I was betting on his overconfidence, on the blind faith he had in my professional competence, and most importantly, on the distraction Chloe was creating. Julian took the Mont Blanc pen I offered. He didn't even bother to flip through the pages, as was his usual cautious habit. He went straight to the final page, where the signature line was already marked. He asked perfunctorily, "Everything's the same as we discussed yesterday, right? You've double-checked it?" I nodded, looking directly into his eyes. "Yes, I've checked it very carefully. Not a single clause was missed. You can sign with confidence." The nib glided across the paper, creating a dry, rustling sound. Julian's signature was swift and decisive, putting an end to the 3 years I had dedicated to building my company and an end to our hollow marriage. The moment he capped the pen, I felt a massive weight lift from my chest, yet at the same time, a desolate emptiness consumed me. The pen he had just used was a gift from me on our first anniversary. Its barrel was engraved with the small, ironic words, "Your partner in everything." He had used the very symbol of our love to sign its death warrant. As soon as he finished, Julian shot up, hastily buttoning his suit jacket. He addressed the board with a superficial apology. "My apologies, gentlemen. I have an urgent family matter to attend to. Director Ava will preside over the remaining details." Without waiting for a response, he turned and strode out of the room. His tall figure disappeared behind the heavy wooden doors, never once looking back at me. He had no idea that his signature had just cost him far more than he could ever imagine. I sat alone in the vast boardroom, picking up the portfolio and gently stroking his still wet signature. A single hot tear fell, blurring a corner of the divorce decree, but I quickly wiped it away. Crying now was the most useless luxury. I stood up, gathered the documents, my face returning to the cold expression of a woman whose heart had died. When I arrived home, our housekeeper, Maria, was surprised to see me back so early. She hurried over, her thin hands taking the briefcase from me. "Mrs. Hayes, you're home early. Where is Mr. Hayes? You look so pale. Let me make you a cup of chamomile tea." Maria's simple kindness made my eyes sting. In this house, she was probably the only one who truly treated me like family. I shook my head, forcing a weak smile. "I'm fine, Maria. Just a little tired and need to rest." Please go on with your work, and don't let anyone disturb me." I went straight to Julian's study, which had a hidden entrance to the wine cellar below. This was where Julian entertained important clients or enjoyed rare vintages with Chloe. During the times I was away from home, he never knew that behind the floor-to-ceiling oak wine cabinet was a secret vault I had designed when we first moved in. I gently twisted a 1982 vintage bottle in the corner. A soft click echoed, and the secret door swung open, revealing a small, secure space that held a fortune. Inside wasn't wine, but stacks of safe deposit boxes. This was where I kept the entire inheritance my mother left me, the collection of emerald jewelry I had acquired at auctions during my business trips, and bearer bonds I had accumulated over 10 years from my private investments. I was not the dependent woman Julian and his family thought I was. Before becoming his wife, I was a well-known financial investor, but out of love for him, I had stepped back, hiding my shrewdness to become a supportive wife. The total value of the assets in this room, by a conservative estimate, was no less than $25 million. A middle-aged man with gold-rimmed glasses and a sharp black suit was already waiting for me as scheduled. It was Mr. Peterson, a high-end asset appraiser and broker from New York. He bowed respectfully, not asking a single question about why I was liquidating everything. Mr. Peterson put on white gloves, carefully inspecting each pink diamond under a specialized loupe, tapping long strings of numbers into his tablet. The room was silent, save for the clicking of the keyboard and my steady breathing. After nearly 2 hours, he looked up, adjusting his glasses. "Mrs. Hayes, everything is of the highest quality. We can wire the funds immediately to your offshore account in Singapore as requested. However, the commission will be slightly higher due to the expedited transaction." I nodded decisively. "Proceed. I need the money clean and fast. The commission is not an issue." I didn't regret letting these things go. They were lifeless objects, devoid of warmth. What I regretted was my youth and the trust I had placed in the wrong person. When the notification dinged on my phone, confirming the transfer, I felt as if a tumor had been surgically removed from my soul. Mr. Peterson packed the velvet boxes into a secure briefcase, bowed, and left through a back exit like a phantom. I stood alone in the empty vault, the dim yellow light casting shadows on the cold concrete walls. Slowly, I removed the wedding ring from my finger. The band had left a pale, ghostly mark on my skin. This ring, which I had once treasured like a sacred relic, believing it to be a circle of eternal connection, was now just a cold metal loop shackling me to tragedy. I placed it on a small wooden table in the center of the room, next to a note with the code to the new, now empty safe. A sharp pain shot through my stomach without warning, as violent as if someone were twisting a dull knife inside me. It was likely the consequence of years of drinking on an empty stomach to entertain clients and sign deals for Julian's company. Combined with the extreme stress of the past few days, my body was in protest. I staggered out of the cellar, clutching my abdomen, a cold sweat drenching my thin silk blouse. The sprawling mansion was shrouded in darkness and an eerie silence. Maria had already retired to her quarters in the guest house out back. I tried to drag myself to the living room sofa as a wave of nausea rose in my throat. Then, a warm, metallic-tasting fluid surged from my mouth, staining the imported cream-colored rug crimson. In a dizzying haze, a wife's instinct made me reach for the phone on the coffee table and press speed dial number 1. It was Julian's number, which I had set as my emergency contact for the past 10 years, with the naive hope that if anything ever happened to me, he would be the first to arrive. The phone rang, on and on, a long, desperate plea lost at sea. The first call went unanswered. The second time, the line was busy. On the third attempt, just as I thought I would pass out from blood loss, someone picked up. But instead of the worried voice I longed for, it was Julian's irritated bark. "Chloe is having a nightmare. She just fell asleep. Can you not call and bother me right now? Whatever it is, we can talk about it in the morning." Before I could even whisper "help me," the cold, monotonous dial tone buzzed in my ear, severing the last thread connecting me to him. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto the cold floor. I curled into a ball, tears mixing with the blood at the corner of my mouth. So, in his eyes, the life of his wife of 10 years was worth less than the restless sleep of his former lover. I bit my lip, using the last of my strength to dial 911. I couldn't die. I wasn't allowed to die now, when the curtain had just risen on my play of revenge. I had to live well enough to see the day he regretted everything. The ambulance arrived 15 minutes later, its siren tearing through the quiet night of the exclusive neighborhood. I was rushed to the emergency room of a private international hospital, where the blinding white lights and the sharp smell of antiseptic made me even dizzier. The on-call doctor looked at me with concern, informing me that I had a severe stomach hemorrhage and needed an immediate endoscopic procedure to stop the bleeding. He required a family member to sign the consent form. According to hospital policy, any procedure involving anesthesia and high risk required a relative's consent, a rigid rule to avoid future litigation. A young nurse looked around and asked, "Ma'am, where is your husband or a family member? You need to call them urgently. Your condition can't wait." Lying on the gurney, I stared at the blank white ceiling, a sense of desolation more painful than the wound in my stomach washing over me. I whispered to the doctor, my voice weak but firm, "I have no family. My husband, he passed away. Just give me the papers. I'll sign them myself. I take full responsibility for my own life." The doctor stared at me, stunned. He had probably never encountered a patient so lucidly brutal in a life-or-death situation. Finally, faced with my resolve and the urgency of my condition, he handed over the form. My hand trembled as I took the pen and signed my name in the patient's box. The signature was shaky, but absolute. The moment the pen left the paper, I knew I had just surgically removed the last vestiges of affection I had for Julian. From this moment on, I would live only for myself. I woke up as the anesthesia wore off. A dull, burning pain lingered in my abdomen, but my mind was remarkably clear. The only thing that greeted me was a text message from my bank, a $2,000 charge for the hospital deposit. I gave a humorless laugh, reaching for the laptop I always kept in my bag, which had come with me in the ambulance. To me, at this moment, a computer was more reliable than any person. I logged into our home's security camera system. It was a custom setup with my own private server, running parallel to the one Julian used. So even if he changed the password or turned off the cameras, I could still access it through a back door. The monitor displayed the familiar living room of our mansion. The wall clock showed 10 a.m. Julian walked in, but he wasn't alone. Beside him was Chloe. She was wearing a burgundy silk nightgown, her arm linked through his as if she were the lady of the house. My heart no longer ached. It had turned to stone. I watched them as if they were two actors in a poorly staged play. Chloe walked into my kitchen, opened the refrigerator for a drink, and then looked up at Julian with a coy voice. "Honey, what's the Wi-Fi password? I tried your birthday, but it didn't work." Julian, loosening his tie, smiled and stroked her hair affectionately. "Oh, Ava set that one. I think it's our anniversary or something. I don't remember. I'll have a technician come change it later. We'll make it your birthday, okay?" My fingers, resting on the keyboard, froze. Our wedding anniversary, the number I cherished and used to protect our home, was now just a meaningless string of digits to him, something to be erased. I didn't scream or break anything. I calmly opened a browser and accessed the router's admin page for the mansion. With a few simple commands, I changed the administrator password, kicked every connected device off the network, and set up a firewall to block any new connections. I entered a new Wi-Fi password, a long, random string of characters impossible to guess. On the camera feed, I saw Chloe frowning at her phone, which now showed no connection. Julian fumbled with the router, clueless as to why the signal light had turned red. But I didn't stop there. Since Julian's work computer at home was on and connected to the local network, I activated a hidden surveillance software I had installed long ago as a corporate security precaution. The program would log all keystrokes, take periodic screenshots, and send reports to my private cloud server. I suspected Chloe wasn't just after Julian's affection. A pragmatist like her was undoubtedly targeting money and corporate secrets. The next morning, I turned my hospital room into a makeshift office. Though the doctor advised rest, I knew I had no time for weakness. On my laptop, I had two windows open side by side, one showing the flickering red and green of the stock market, the other a live feed of the board meeting at Quantum Group. It was the first meeting after the merger. I should have been sitting in the vice chair seat for technology, but that chair was now empty. Through the camera, I saw an elderly shareholder speak up. "Why isn't Ava here today? The system integration between the two companies is highly complex. We need her professional opinion." Julian stood at the podium, his demeanor as composed as ever. He adjusted the microphone and lied without blinking. "Ladies and gentlemen, my wife is on an unexpected business trip overseas to research new markets for our upcoming tech products. She sends her apologies for her absence and has delegated full decision-making authority to me." I smirked. The glass of orange juice in my hand suddenly tasted bitter. He lied so smoothly that if I weren't lying here with an IV in my arm, I might have believed my wife was really jet-setting across the globe. I contacted my trusted broker and ordered him to sell off all the miscellaneous stocks I held under my personal name in various subsidiary companies. These were private investments, not part of our shared marital assets. I wanted to liquidate as much cash as possible. The broker messaged back, his tone worried. "Ava, it's not a good time to sell. The market is in a downturn." I typed a quick reply, "Sell it all. Regardless of the price. I need the liquidity today." I didn't care about a few percentage points of loss. What I needed was to sever every financial tie to Julian's ecosystem. Just then, I received a message from Jessica, my loyal former assistant, who still worked at the company. She sent me a photo of a new personnel announcement posted on the internal bulletin board. I zoomed in. The words hit me like a punch. "APE appointment. MS. Chloe Reynolds, Director of Communications and Branding." So this was why Julian was in such a hurry for me to sign the merger papers. He had already cleared a path for his mistress to enter the leadership team. I had once held that position in the early startup days to save on salary costs. I had pulled countless all-nighters developing strategies, begged journalists to write PR articles for our company. Now, Chloe could just walk in and take her seat on the throne of my hard work, as if it were her birthright. I looked at Chloe's beaming face in her new employee ID photo, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Fine," I thought. "If you like sitting in a high chair, I'll let you sit. But remember, the higher you sit, the harder you fall." I closed the laptop and pulled the IV from my arm, even though the bag was still half full. A little blood trickled out before stopping, just like the pain in my heart. It had been cauterized by a dose of cold, calculated revenge. Today was my 32nd birthday. In previous years, no matter how busy, I would cook a lavish meal, arrange fresh flowers, and wait for Julian to come home to cut the cake. But this year, I welcomed a new age in a quiet cafe across the street from a notary's office. My phone vibrated. It wasn't a birthday wish from my husband, but an automatic reminder from Facebook, "It's your birthday. Share a moment." I scrolled through my feed, and a photo posted 15 minutes ago caught my eye. It was from an employee at the company. The picture showed a lavish celebration at one of the city's most exclusive Michelin-starred restaurants. The caption read, "Celebrating our new boss Chloe's appointment, Quantum Group on fire." In the center of the photo, Julian was raising a glass of wine, smiling broadly, his other arm wrapped possessively around Chloe's waist. But the detail that made my heart clench wasn't the embrace, it was the tie he was wearing. It was a slim, cobalt blue silk tie with a subtle pattern that I had spent a month special ordering from Italy for his birthday last month. He had told me he loved it, promising to wear it only on the most special occasions. Apparently, his special occasion was a celebration for his mistress, while his wife's birthday was tossed aside like a piece of trash. I turned off the phone and looked up at the man sitting across from me. It was David, a top real estate agent who was helping me handle my luxury condo in Pacific Heights. It was a property I had bought with my own savings before my marriage, a place I had planned to have my parents move into for their retirement. David pushed a file towards me, his expression hesitant. "Ava, are you sure about this? This unit has a beautiful view of the Golden Gate Bridge. If we sell in a hurry, you'll have to accept a price about 15% below market value. Can't we wait a few months?" I watched the bustling city life outside the window and shook my head firmly. I can't wait, David. I need the cash now. 15% or 20%? I'll accept it, as long as the deal is closed this week and the money is in my account by Friday. David looked at me, confused, probably thinking I was bankrupt or in some deep trouble. He had no idea I was selling off my last anchor in this city to prepare for a departure with no return date. I signed the power of attorney agreement. My handwriting was much stronger than it had been when I signed the fake divorce papers. I thought I would be sad selling the home that held so many memories of my single life, but strangely, I felt a sense of relief. Money, property, they were all just material things. When a person's heart changes, even a house plated in gold is just 4 cold walls. I stood up, shook David's hand, and walked out of the cafe. The harsh afternoon sun hit my face, forcing me to squint. I said to myself, "Happy birthday, Ava. The greatest gift you're giving yourself this year is freedom." The court summons arrived on a drizzly afternoon, 2 days after I was discharged from the hospital. The mail carrier, clad in a green raincoat, left wet footprints on the polished tile floor, like unhealed scars. I held the brown envelope, its weight not in the paper, but in the single word printed inside: mediation. It was a mandatory legal procedure for contested divorces, but for me, it felt like a final stop to survey the wreckage of a decade of my youth. My phone rang, displaying Julian's name. He had just received the same notice. His voice was full of annoyance and blame, the loud background music indicating he wasn't at the office. "Ava, what is this? Why is the court summoning us for mediation? I thought we agreed to wait until after the merger dust settled, withdraw the petition. Don't make a mess of things when the company needs a stable image." I calmly held the phone to my ear, my other hand brewing a pot of hot Earl Grey tea to ward off the chill from the rain. "It's a mandatory legal process," I replied, my voice as light as the wind. "I can't withdraw it. Just make time for it. It'll only take one morning. Or are you afraid to face me?" There was a moment of silence on his end, then an exasperated sigh. "Fine. Let's meet tomorrow at the Daily Grind, that cafe near the courthouse. I want to talk to you before we go in." The Daily Grind was tucked away in a quiet alley, a world apart from the city's hustle. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table where I could watch the raindrops patter on the awning. Julian was late, looking rushed and disheveled, his tie askew. He sat down, ordered his usual black coffee, and looked at me with a mixture of scrutiny and exhaustion. "Look at me, Ava. I'm swamped. The company has a million things to deal with post-merger. If you can't help, at least don't cause more trouble." I didn't argue. I just silently pushed a thin file across the table. It wasn't the divorce petition, but a printout of several irregular marketing expenses from the last quarter, all under Chloe's management. The amount wasn't huge, just a few $100,000 in discrepancies, but it was a clear sign of fraud. "I don't want to cause trouble," I said, my voice as sincere as I could make it. "Before we go to court, I wanted you to see this. These are numbers from the communications department. There's a huge gap between the quotes and the actual spending. You should look into your new hire." Julian glanced at the paper, then tossed it on the table with a bitter laugh. "This again? Is your jealousy making you paranoid, Ava? Chloe just got the job. You're resentful, so you're trying to dig up dirt on her, right? This amount is nothing compared to the group's revenue. Don't be so petty. It's beneath you." His words were a splash of cold water, extinguishing the last embers of affection I had for him. He trusted his mistress's feigned innocence over the hard data presented by the wife who had managed his finances for 10 years. I took the paper back, folded it neatly, and put it in my purse. I looked straight into his eyes, the eyes that once made my heart race, and now saw only a strange emptiness. "All right, Julian, let's pretend I never said anything. You can hold on to your beliefs. Let's go to court. It's time." I stood up, paid for our drinks, and walked out ahead of him, leaving him there in his arrogant belief that he controlled everything, completely unaware that he was standing on the edge of a cliff. That weekend, the city lights sparkled like a galaxy on Earth. Julian called, his tone more of a command than an invitation. "There's a business association charity gala tonight. Get ready. Wear something elegant. I don't want people saying I mistreat my wife when the company is doing so well. The car will be there at 7. He needed me as an accessory, a decorative screen to hide the cracks in our crumbling marriage and reassure investors. I stood before my closet, my fingers gliding over expensive evening gowns he had bought me on holidays as a perfunctory gesture. I finally chose a classic, long-sleeved black velvet dress I had bought 3 years ago. It wasn't flashy or ostentatious, but it exuded a quiet, proud melancholy, just like my mood. I put my hair in a high bun, wore only a touch of deep red lipstick, and no jewelry except for an old, simple leather strap watch. When I entered the dazzling, crystal chandeliered ballroom, I immediately felt the curious stares. Julian walked over, looking sharp in a black tuxedo, but his eyes faltered when he saw my simple attire. Before he could chide me, a strong wave of perfume arrived. Chloe appeared from behind him, linking her arm through his, as if she were the hostess of the event. Chloe wore a stunning, fire-engine red mermaid gown with a daring slit up the side. But what caught my attention wasn't her glamorous appearance, it was the diamond necklace she was wearing. It was the Midnight Dew, a one-of-a-kind design I had once coveted, marking it in a catalog I showed Julian for our wedding anniversary last year. He had said it was too expensive and unnecessary. Now, it rested proudly on his lover's neck. Chloe looked at me, her smile sweet but her eyes sharp as knives. "Ava, you look so simple tonight. You must have been busy with family matters and didn't have time to prepare. Julian told me you haven't been feeling well lately. You should get more rest. Leave the socializing to me." I smiled back, a perfect corporate smile I had honed over years in business. "Thank you for your concern, Chloe," I said, my voice calm but loud enough for those around us to hear. "I believe a woman's class comes from her intellect and conduct, not from a few sparkling stones around her neck. Besides, jewelry, like the person wearing it, has to be a good fit to look elegant. Otherwise, it just looks tacky." Chloe was speechless, her face flushing with anger, but she couldn't react in front of the crowd. I walked away from them, taking a glass of champagne to a quiet corner of the balcony. There, a distinguished-looking middle-aged man was waiting for me. It was Michael, an old financial partner who was discreetly helping me move my funds offshore. We lightly clinked our glasses. "It's done," he said quietly, just for me to hear. "The $1.5 million has been dispersed into the investment fund under the guise of an angel investor. The paperwork is clean. No one will be able to trace it back to you." I nodded, taking a sip of the dry, bitter champagne. While Julian and Chloe were basking in the hollow limelight, I had just finished setting the biggest financial trap of my life. For them, this party was a stage for showing off. For me, it was where I officially stepped out from the shadow of a long-suffering wife and became a grandmaster of the game. I was at home, sorting through visa paperwork in my study, when my phone rang frantically. It was Julian's number on the screen. It was 11 p.m., a time he was usually out with Chloe or entertaining clients. I answered, and before I could say hello, his panicked, fear-stricken voice screamed through the phone. "Ava, help me! The group's main server has been hacked. All our transaction data is being encrypted. Clients are calling and screaming at us. Log in and help me, now!" I asked calmly, "What about your new IT team? Where is that director you hired for a 6-figure salary?" "They're a bunch of useless idiots," Julian yelled in desperation. "They're just staring at the screens like deer in headlights." Chloe said her friend recommended them, and now this happens. They're all talk. "Please, Ava, just help me this one time. If we can't fix this, Quantum stock will be worthless by morning." I sighed. After all, a part of my soul was still in that company. I opened my laptop, my fingers flying across the familiar keyboard. A black screen with scrolling green code appeared. Just as I suspected, it was a large-scale DDoS attack, exploiting a basic security vulnerability that the incompetent new staff had created while trying to alter my old system architecture. 15 minutes later, the traffic graph on the monitor began to stabilize. The blaring red alerts turned to a safe green. On the other end of the line, I heard Julian's sigh of relief and the admiring whispers of his staff. "Okay, the system is back online," I said, my hand still on the keyboard. "But this is just a temporary fix. The security flaw needs a complete code rewrite." "Thank you, Ava. You saved us. I'll have accounting wire you a bonus," Julian said, his voice regaining its usual arrogant tone. I laughed wryly. He still thought everything could be solved with money. While he was celebrating his narrow escape, I silently typed a short string of code deep into the system's core. It wasn't a destructive virus, but a sophisticated backdoor. It was a master key that would allow me to access and extract any sensitive data from the corporation at any time, including internal chats and shady transactions they tried to hide. The next morning, I went to the corporate headquarters, not to receive thanks or a bonus, but to clear out the last of my things. I went straight to my old office on the 18th floor. On the familiar wooden door was a brand new plaque, Chloe Reynolds, Director of Communications. I pushed the door open. The cloying scent of sweet perfume hit me, replacing the faint, pleasant aroma of roasted coffee that used to fill the room. The office was completely transformed. My sophisticated brown leather sofa was replaced by a tacky pink velvet settee. The bookshelves, once filled with my technical manuals, were now lined with fashion magazines and gaudy decorative statues. In a corner, I saw several old cardboard boxes tossed aside. Inside were my plaques and trophies for Outstanding Tech Leader and framed photos of Julian and me from our startup days, all thrown in like garbage waiting to be taken out. I wasn't angry. I just found it pathetic. Chloe could have the office, she could have the title, but she could never have my mind or my resilience. I wasn't there for those meaningless souvenirs. I walked to the wall, safe, hidden behind a landscape painting, the one thing Chloe hadn't touched because she didn't know the code. I entered the combination, and the door swung open. Inside were the hard drives containing the original source code for all the core software I had written, along with the intellectual property registration documents filed under my personal name. This was the real asset, the weapon I would use to deliver a fatal blow later. I packed the drives and files into my bag and turned to leave. As I stepped into the hallway, I ran right into Julian and Chloe. Chloe, clinging to Julian's arm, shrieked when she saw me coming out of her office. "Ava, what were you doing in my office? Did you take anything?" Julian looked at the bag in my hand and frowned. "You came to pack your things? Why didn't you just ask the office staff to do it for you?" I glanced at them both, my eyes lingering on Chloe's hand, gripping my husband's arm as if afraid someone would steal him away. I straightened my collar and replied, enunciating each word clearly. "I came to get what belongs to me, things that your money can't buy. As for this office, and this chair, you can keep it warm. I'm clearing out to make way for someone more deserving. Or perhaps, for someone who better fits the mediocrity of this place." With that, I walked straight to the elevator, leaving behind Chloe's stunned face and Julian's confused, contemplative gaze. That weekend, Julian's mother from back east made a surprise visit. She called me when she was already at the gate of our mansion, her arms full of homemade pies and jams, things she knew I loved. I was at my old condo, finalizing the sale paperwork, and my heart clenched when I heard her voice. She was a simple, kind woman who had always treated me like her own daughter. I couldn't bear for her to know the painful truth, at least not yet. Julian called right after, his tone uncharacteristically pleading. "Ava, can you please come home for a bit? Mom is here, and she doesn't know about us. For her sake, please, just play the happy couple for a few days. I'm begging you." I was silent for a long moment, staring at the gray sky outside my window. I sighed. Fine. I drove back to the mansion. Julian's mother, Mrs. Hayes, ran out to greet me, her aged face lighting up. She took my hand, her warm, calloused grip transmitting a familial warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. "Ava, dear, you've gotten so thin. Is work that busy?" "I brought your favorite apple pie. We'll have it for dessert tonight." I forced back tears and hugged her. "Thank you, Mom. I've missed your pies so much." Dinner was a tense affair, though only Mrs. Hayes was oblivious. She kept putting food on my plate and Julian's, telling stories from home. Julian played the part of the attentive husband, giving me the best cut of roast chicken, though he avoided my eyes. Suddenly, Maria, the housekeeper, chimed in. "Your cooking is wonderful, Mrs. Hayes. No wonder Miss Chloe always raves about it whenever she comes over for dinner." The atmosphere froze. Mrs. Hayes put down her fork and looked from Maria to Julian. "Chloe? Who is Chloe? Why is she eating here so often? Julian went pale, stammering for an explanation, but I quickly intervened, though my heart was breaking. Oh, Chloe is a new colleague of Julian's, Mom. She lives alone and often works late with him, so sometimes she just stops by for a meal. Don't worry about it. Mrs. Hayes looked at me with suspicion, but eventually let it go and resumed eating. That night, I made a bed for myself on the living room floor, saying my back hurt and I needed a firm surface. Julian came to the door, his hand on the knob, but found it locked from the inside. He stood there for a long time, his shadow stretching across the floor under the door. I lay in the darkness, listening to his heavy sigh, and wondered if it contained any regret or just relief at having fooled his elderly mother. For the days his mother stayed, I lived a double life, a dutiful, happy daughter-in-law by day, and a digital ghost by night, silently investigating my husband. Thanks to the surveillance software, I easily monitored all of Julian's computer activity. Chloe was smart. She didn't use company email for her shady dealings, but a secure encrypted chat app. But she didn't know my keylogger recorded everything, even self-destructing messages. On the third night, after everyone was asleep, I opened my laptop. A report from the monitoring system had come in. A conversation between Chloe and an unknown contact named Chief Accountant appeared. The topic was processing invoices for a $1.5 million communications project recently signed with a company called Soul Media. I did a quick search. Soul Media was a shell corporation, founded 3 months ago, with a ghost address in a suburb, and the legal representative was Chloe's cousin. In the chat, Chloe instructed, "Go ahead and process the 50% advance payment. The partner is family, so it's safe. They'll issue the invoices later. Julian has already approved the project, you just need to release the funds." Attached was a screenshot of a $750,000 wire transfer made that afternoon. I was chilled by her audacity. $750,000, the fruit of so many employees' hard work, and she siphoned it off as easily as taking cash from her own wallet. I saved all the evidence, the chat logs, the wire transfer confirmation, the legal documents of the shell company. The thought of exposing her immediately crossed my mind, but I held back. $750,000 wasn't enough to make Julian see the truth. He would just make excuses for her, saying it was a procedural error or that she was too naive. I needed a bigger number, a harder blow to completely shatter his blind faith, and more importantly, I wanted him to taste the pain of being backstabbed by the person he trusted most, just as he had done to me. There were only 10 days left until the court-mandated mediation period ended. Julian's mother had gone home, taking with her the false sense of peace we had carefully constructed. Julian's company began to face cash flow problems. Chloe's reckless spending on ghost projects, combined with banks tightening credit due to concerns about post-merger management, had pushed Quantum Group into a corner. Employees started whispering about delayed salaries. Partners were calling to collect debts. Julian scrambled everywhere for funding, but was politely rejected at every turn. In his most desperate hour, a glimmer of hope appeared. A venture capital fund based in Singapore, acting through a prestigious law firm in the U.S., expressed interest in investing $1.5 million into the core technology project Julian was developing. It was a lifeline in a sea of fire. Julian was overjoyed. He quickly arranged a meeting with the fund's legal representative. At the meeting, the lawyer presented an investment contract with extremely strict terms. "Mr. Hayes, my client is an anonymous angel investor. She highly values the technological potential of Quantum Group, but she also demands extreme financial transparency. The $1.5 million investment will be dispersed, but you must sign a commitment of unlimited personal liability for the use of these funds. If any misuse or fraud is detected, you will be required to repay double the amount and transfer full operational control of the company to the fund." Julian, desperate for capital and blinded by overconfidence, signed the agreement without hesitation. He never suspected that the generous angel investor was me, the wife he was casting aside. Ironically, that $1.5 million was the exact money I got from selling the heirloom jewelry he had once gifted me, combined with the proceeds from the sale of my condo. I was using my own money to buy a controlling stake in my husband's company, but under a different name, a different status, the one holding all the cards. Looking at the scanned copy of the contract with Julian's signature, I felt no triumph, only a deep sense of sorrow. He was willing to sell his soul to a stranger, to bow to outside money, yet he couldn't value the woman who had stood by him through thick and thin for so many years. Fine, I thought. If you love money so much, I'll use money to teach you a lesson you'll never forget about the value of loyalty. A sudden downpour turned the freeway into a blinding, whitewater river. I was driving back from a final meeting with the investment fund's lawyer when my car suddenly sputtered, the engine shuddering violently before dying in the middle of the road. I tried to restart it several times, but it was no use. The dashboard flashed an engine overheat error. I sat in the car, watching the rain streak down the windshield, feeling a wave of helplessness wash over me. Trucks roared past, spraying water everywhere. The blare of horns mixed with the drumming of rain on the roof, a frantic rhythm matching my heartbeat. Out of ingrained habit, I picked up my phone and called Julian. Even though we were in a Cold War, even though the divorce papers were on a judge's desk, he was still the first person I thought of in a crisis. The phone rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. I called again. This time, the line was busy. He was probably in a meeting, or busy with something more important than my safety. 15 minutes later, while waiting for roadside assistance, my phone buzzed with a new notification. It wasn't from Julian. It was a new post from Chloe on her public social media profile. In the photo, Julian was holding a hairdryer, carefully drying her damp hair, strand by strand. The setting was the living room of her private apartment, with its warm, ambient lighting and plush cream sofa. The caption was short but devastating. Stormy weather outside, but lucky to have him bring the sunshine to dry my hair. I looked at the photo, then at the dark, pouring rain outside my cold car window. The contrast was brutal. Over there, he was tenderly caring for his lover, cherishing her like a treasure. And here, his wife of 10 years was stranded alone on a freeway, facing fear and a bone-deep chill. The reason my call was busy was because he was busy loving someone else. My tears wouldn't fall. Perhaps they had run dry after months of pain. I turned off the phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. The tow truck arrived and took my car to a garage. I sat in the back of a taxi on the way home, my heart as still as a lake after a storm. I opened a travel app and booked the earliest flight to Europe for the day after tomorrow. I couldn't wait any longer. I didn't want to breathe the same air as his betrayal for another second. On my last day in the city, the sun was shining with a heart-wrenching beauty. I woke up early, put on a simple linen outfit, and took a cab to the city cemetery in Colma, just south of San Francisco. My parents' graves lay peacefully under an old oak tree, its leaves rustling in the breeze. I lit a stick of incense, the smoke curling towards the sky, carrying the silent words of a daughter far from home. Mom, Dad, I'm sorry I couldn't keep the family together like you hoped. I tried my best. I loved with all my heart, but fate is fragile and people are fickle. I have to let go. I stood there for a long time, telling them about my decision to leave, about my plans for the future. Not to complain, but to reassure them that their daughter was still strong. The wind rustled through the leaves, like my mother's invisible hand stroking my hair. I bowed my head one last time and walked away, feeling as if a great burden had been lifted. Back home, I called Maria into my study. She looked at me with worried eyes, as if she could sense the strangeness in the house. I handed her a thick envelope and a savings bond in her name. Maria, this is your salary for the month, and a little extra for your retirement. And this savings bond is for you, in case of a rainy day. I'm going on a long business trip, and I might not be back for a very long time. After tomorrow, please arrange to go back home to your family. Don't stay here anymore. Maria's hands trembled as she took the envelope, tears welling in her wrinkled eyes. Mrs. Hayes, where are you going? It sounds like you're leaving for good. What about Mr. Hayes? I took her frail hand and smiled reassuringly. I'm going to find a new life, Maria. Don't worry about me. I can take care of myself. Please take care of your health when you go home. She hugged me tightly, sobbing like a mother sending her child off on a long journey. In this vast, cold house, her simple affection was the only baggage I was reluctant to leave behind. In the afternoon, I went to the bank and canceled all the supplementary credit cards I had issued for Julian. The bank teller looked surprised as I closed one high-limit premium card after another, but I just smiled. Severing financial ties was the final step in severing the relationship. I was still getting texts from Julian. "I'll be home late tonight. Don't wait up for dinner. I'll make it up to you with a trip at the end of the month. Don't be so pouty." It's not a good look. He still thought my silence was just a woman's petty tantrum, certain that I would always be there, waiting for him to dispense his scraps of affection. He didn't know that a woman who sulks is a woman who still loves. A woman who is completely silent is a woman preparing to leave. At 4 a.m., while darkness still enveloped the mansion, I was awake. The silence was so profound I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. I went to the kitchen and turned on the stove, the familiar blue flame flaring to life. I took out the ingredients I had prepared the night before and started making his favorite breakfast, pancakes from scratch, with crispy bacon and eggs just the way he liked them. The clatter of the whisk, the smell of melting butter and maple syrup filled the kitchen, evoking memories of days when our love was still warm and sweet. This was the last breakfast I would ever make for him, a final ritual to send off our 10-year marriage. As I placed the hot breakfast on the dining table, the sun began to rise. I returned to the study and placed 3 crucial items on Julian's oak desk. First, a bright red USB drive containing the complete source code for the new system. I had spent countless nights perfecting a farewell gift worth an intellectual fortune. Next, a thick, neatly clipped file containing the irrefutable evidence of Chloe's embezzlement and the receipt for the $1.5 million wire transfer that had saved his company. Finally, I took off my wedding ring and placed it next to the house keys. The diamond ring caught the morning light, sparkling but cold and soulless. I didn't write a long, sentimental letter of blame. I just left a small yellow sticky note with 2 simple words: goodbye. All words were now meaningless when the heart was empty. I grabbed the small, packed suitcase by the door and took one last look around the house. Every corner, every piece of furniture bore the mark of my care. But now, they all felt alien, as if they had never belonged to me. I didn't go into the bedroom to see Julian one last time. I was afraid a moment of weakness would hold me back. I pushed the door open and walked outside. The click-clack of the suitcase wheels on the stone patio sounded jarringly loud. The heavy iron gate closed behind me with a decisive clang, separating me from my past. The taxi was waiting. I got in and told the driver, "San Francisco International Airport, International Terminal, please." The car pulled away, leaving the pristine white mansion behind, still lost in its false, peaceful slumber. I didn't look back. No tears fell. Ahead of me was a vast sky, freedom, and a new life, waiting a life without betrayal and lies. SFO was bustling with people, the announcements for departing flights echoing through the terminal. But in my ears, everything was muffled, replaced by the thumping of my own heart. I sat in the business class lounge, the coffee on my table long since cold. My eyes were glued to my phone, monitoring the signals from our smart home system. At exactly 7:30 a.m., a notification. Front door opened. Julian was awake. I could picture him, groggily walking downstairs, smelling the fresh breakfast and smiling smugly, thinking his wife had finally gotten over her anger. He would sit at the table and call my name, but get no answer. The unusual silence of the house would make him uneasy. 7:45 a.m. Another notification from my surveillance software, USB device connected. My heart skipped a beat. He was in the study. He had seen what I left. He must be holding the file now, his fingers trembling as he turned the pages, seeing the financial investigation that exposed his lover's true face, the embezzled figures I had circled in red. The biggest shock would come when he saw the receipt for the $1.5 million transfer from the Singaporean fund, revealing the true beneficiary behind the legal curtain, Ava Hayes. 8 a.m. My phone began ringing incessantly. Julian. The name I hadn't yet changed glowed on the screen. I looked at it, smiled bitterly, and hit decline. Immediately, I popped out the SIM card, snapped it in two, and threw it in a nearby trash can, a final, decisive act. At the same moment, a notification appeared on my tablet. Admin account has been logged out of the system. It was an automated script I had set to trigger 15 minutes after the USB was plugged in. I had just deleted my own access to the Quantum Group system while simultaneously sending an automated email to the entire board of directors with the subject line, Report of Malfeasance and Technology Handover. Now boarding, Flight LH 455 to Frankfurt at Gate G18. The announcement of my name brought me back to reality. I stood up, adjusted my jacket, and walked towards the gate. I imagined Julian, frantically running out of the house, racing against time to find me, but he was too late. As the plane took off, piercing through the white clouds into the vast blue sky, I looked down at the shrinking city one last time. Down there, the storm I had created was just beginning to break over the heads of the unfaithful, and I was flying towards peace. The moment he read the single word goodbye on the tiny yellow note, Julian had bolted from the house like a madman. He didn't change out of his rumpled pajamas, just jammed his feet into his loafers without tying them, jumped in his car, and floored it. The luxury sedan weaved recklessly through rush-hour traffic, as if trying to tear a hole in space and time to reclaim something that was already lost. He called my number over and over, only to be met by the cold, automated voice saying the subscriber could not be reached. It was the first time in their 13 years together that he had ever experienced being rejected by me, being so decisively cut out of my life. He arrived at SFO just as the departures board flipped the status of the flight to Frankfurt to a red, final, departed. He abandoned his illegally parked car at the curb and sprinted inside, his eyes wild and bloodshot, searching for a familiar figure in the endless sea of travelers. He ran from check-in counter to check-in counter, grabbing the arms of security guards and airline staff, desperately asking about a woman named Ava. But in an airport that sees tens of thousands of faces a day, who would remember one quiet woman leaving? The bustling energy of the airport was a stark contrast to the utter collapse within him. Julian stood frozen in the middle of the international terminal, his hand still clutching the red USB drive I had left. He looked up at the flight board, at the planes lining up to take to the sky, carrying away the wife he had always taken for granted, the steadfast support system he never imagined would leave. Only then did he truly understand the price of his neglect. The money, the status, the power of a billion-dollar corporation's CEO were all useless against the vastness of geography and the resolve of a heart that had grown cold. I heard he sank to the cold tile floor of the airport, oblivious to the curious and concerned glances of passers-by. The man who had always held his head high with pride was now a crumpled figure, his shoulders shaking. Perhaps in that moment, he realized he had lost the most precious thing in his life, not a talented tech director, but the only person in the world who had loved him unconditionally, the only one who would have stood by him when everyone else turned away. But regret, no matter how agonizing, could not turn back time. Julian returned to the office after 10 a.m. His disheveled, frantic appearance stunned the receptionist, but no one dared to say a word. He went straight to his office and slammed the door, shutting himself off from the world. In the suffocating silence, he shakily inserted the red USB drive into his computer. It was the last key I had left him, a key to unlock the truth he had so willfully ignored. A folder opened automatically. The first file wasn't source code, but a video compilation, spliced from our home security cameras and the hidden camera on his own work computer, the ones I had quietly installed. He played the video. The first thing he saw was Chloe, the innocent, fragile woman he had cherished, sitting at his computer in the dead of night while he slept. She expertly copied customer data, photographed bidding plans, and sent them to an unknown email address. Her face in the video held none of its usual innocence. It was replaced by cunning calculation and a contemptuous smirk as she glanced at our wedding photo on his desk. The next file was an audio recording of Chloe's phone calls with a competitor, haggling over the price of the data she had stolen from Quantum Group. The sweet voice he had been so captivated by now sounded harsh and reeked of greed and betrayal. She called him a puppet, a gold mine to be exploited before she kicked him to the curb. I can only imagine Julian's face as he watched shock turning to pure, unadulterated rage, the veins in his temples throbbing. His blind faith had been met with a brutal, devastating slap of reality. But the most painful blow came from the final file on the drive, the source code for the upgraded core system. I had poured 3 years of my life into this, pulling all-nighters to write every line of code, optimizing every algorithm, all to help his company run flawlessly. In the code's comments section, instead of dry technical notes, I had left gentle, detailed instructions, like a wife guiding her husband before a long trip. Number: this module needs to be updated monthly, Julian. Don't forget. A number: I've added an extra layer of encryption here. Please don't share the master password carelessly. Every word was steeped in care and concern. Julian's head fell into his hands, his body convulsing with silent sobs. The contrast between the two women was laid bare. The one he adored had tried to sell him out, while the one he neglected had secretly used her talent and devotion to protect him until the very end. The office door burst open. Chloe walked in cheerfully, holding a cup of coffee. "Darling, why were you so late this?" Her words died in her throat when she saw the murderous look in his eyes. He said nothing. He just pointed to the door and called security. It was the first and last time Chloe would see the true ruthlessness of the man she thought she had wrapped around her finger. After handing Chloe over to the authorities, armed with the undeniable proof I had provided, Julian returned home as dusk fell. The Riverside mansion had never felt so vast and terrifying. There were no warm lights waiting, no scent of a delicious meal from the kitchen, only enveloping darkness and a chilling silence. His footsteps echoed on the tile, a lonely, mournful sound. He wandered through the rooms like a ghost. The living room, where I used to wait for him every night, was now just a cold sofa. The bedroom, once our sanctuary, was empty and hollow. My side of the closet was bare. Not a single dress or lingering scent of my perfume remained. He opened my vanity drawer, where I kept the jewelry he'd given me. It was completely empty, save for the red velvet box containing my wedding ring, sitting there like a tiny tombstone for our dead marriage. In a desperate search for any trace of me, he remembered the wine cellar. He descended the dark steps, fumbled for the light switch, and saw that the secret door behind the wine rack was slightly ajar. Perhaps I had left it that way on purpose. He pushed the door open and froze, stunned by the secret space he never knew existed in his own home. The safes were all open and empty. On the table lay the New York expert's asset appraisal and the wire transfer receipts to Singapore. The numbers on the page made him dizzy. Diamonds, emeralds, bearer bonds, a total value in the tens of millions. He picked up the paper, his hand shaking. It turned out that the wife he thought was just a tech geek who didn't know how to spend money, the wife he thought was dependent on him, was secretly a multimillionaire with a fortune that dwarfed his own. He remembered all the times I had refused to buy designer clothes, worn old dresses to parties, or reminded him to cut company costs. He had laughed at me then, calling me provincial and unsophisticated. Now he understood. I didn't need those superficial things to define my worth. I was richer than him in every way that mattered, not just in money, but in self-respect and strength. He stood in the middle of the empty room, a crushing sense of inferiority and shame consuming him. He hadn't just lost a wife, he had lost his pride as a man. From the day I left, Julian developed chronic insomnia. The magnificent mansion became a prison, trapping him with torturous memories. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw me in the kitchen, or my weary silhouette hunched over a computer, fixing a system glitch for him. He became afraid of the dark, of the silence, so he threw himself into work like a moth to a flame, trying to numb the pain with exhaustion. But ironically, my presence was even stronger at the office. Every time he turned on his computer, the software I wrote greeted him with its familiar interface. Every line of code, every operational process, every financial report bore the indelible mark of my mind. He couldn't erase me, because I was the lifeblood of his company. He was living and working on the legacy I left behind, like a beggar feasting on the past. He hired the best private investigators, paying exorbitant fees to find me. "Find her. Whatever it costs, I'll pay," he commanded, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep and whiskey. But every report came back the same: no trace. I had planned my disappearance too meticulously. I had a new identity, a foreign passport, and had moved through multiple countries, wiping my digital footprint clean. It was as if I had vanished from the face of the earth. At night, Julian would sit in my old office, the one he had let Chloe turn into a tacky pink nightmare. He had it restored to exactly how it was when I was there. He sat in my chair, ran his hand over the cool wood of the desk, and poured himself a stiff drink. He would look out at the glittering city lights below, a city of millions of people, but not the one person he needed. Helplessness gnawed at him. He realized that money could buy information, but it couldn't buy back a person who was determined to be gone. He began to fear the sound of his own phone, simultaneously hoping it was news of me and dreading another meaningless work call. He lived in a state of agonizing waiting, a hopeless vigil that he had once forced me to endure for years. Karma, sometimes, doesn't come like a hurricane. It seeps in slowly, cold and persistent, like an endless, drizzling rain. A year passed. In a foreign land, I slowly rediscovered a peaceful rhythm for myself. Meanwhile, back home, I knew someone was still lost in the shadows of the past. I later heard from the few mutual friends I kept in contact with that Julian lived that year like a ghost. He became a work machine, locking himself in his office to escape the loneliness that consumed him each night. One late afternoon, while flipping through an international tech journal, Julian's eyes landed on a small article in the corner of a page. It reported on a social innovation award in Europe that had just been given to an anonymous female programmer of Hispanic descent. Her app helped visually impaired people navigate and identify obstacles using voice commands in Spanish, a product that was more humanitarian than commercial. Although the article didn't include a photo or her real name, using only the pseudonym Anne, her sharp, eloquent, and compassionate interview answers made Julian's heart pound. He recognized that voice, that way of thinking. She spoke of technology not as cold algorithms, but as a tool to warm the forgotten corners of life. It was the same philosophy I had shared with him in the early days of our startup, back when he hadn't yet been blinded by money. A powerful intuition told him that Anne was Ava, the wife he had been tirelessly searching for. Without a second's hesitation, he called his secretary, his voice cracking with emotion. "Book me the earliest flight to Europe. Cancel all my meetings this week. I have something more important than life itself to do." He flew across the world like a man dying of thirst who had found an oasis. In his hastily packed bag, besides a few changes of clothes, was our old wedding photo, which he had carefully laminated after finding it discarded in a storage room. He carried that fragile hope across thousands of miles, believing that if he could just see me, he would have a chance to atone for his mistakes. But he forgot that some rivers, once they flow into the sea, never return to their source. Europe greeted Julian with a cold, drizzling rain and a sky the color of his mood. He went to the magazine's headquarters, hoping to get my contact information. But strict privacy laws were an insurmountable wall. The editor was polite but firm, refusing all his pleas, even when he presented his CEO business card. They said the author wished to remain anonymous, and they would respect that. Undeterred, Julian began to wander aimlessly through the city's streets, haunting tech cafes and public libraries, places he thought I might be. He walked for miles each day, his expensive leather shoes caked in mud, his face gaunt. Every time he saw a woman with long, dark hair, his heart would leap, only to be crushed by the face of a stranger. One afternoon, sitting in a small cafe by a river, he saw a woman reading a book at a table across the street. Her slender frame and the beige sweater she wore were achingly familiar. She tucked her hair behind her ear, a gesture so characteristic of me it took his breath away. He shot up from his chair, ran out of the cafe, and darted across the street against the blaring traffic. He reached her side, his voice trembling as he called my name. "Ava, is that you?" The woman turned around, her face completely unfamiliar. She looked at him, startled, then hurried away, thinking he was a creep. Julian stood frozen in the rain, the water mixing with the salty tears on his cheeks. A wave of utter despair washed over him. He realized that fate was punishing him in the cruelest way possible. Before, I was always right beside him, but he had never bothered to look. Now that he wanted to see me, the world was too vast, too empty to find me. He sank onto a park bench, watching the yellow leaves fall. He understood that the distance between us was no longer just geographical, it was the chasm between two different worlds. I had moved on and found my peace, while he was forever trapped in the winter of his regret. While Julian was lost in Europe, Chloe's trial took place back in the States. The case of embezzlement and corporate espionage at Quantum Group was a media sensation. I wasn't there, but my lawyer attended on my behalf and sent detailed reports. In the courtroom, Chloe was no longer the glamorous, powerful director of communications. She wore a baggy prison uniform, her face pale and haggard. The evidence from my USB drive, combined with the testimony of her accomplices, left her with no way out. Under the judge's sharp questioning, she confessed to everything: falsifying bids, inflating marketing costs, planting spyware on Julian's computer. Horrifyingly, she also admitted that her dramatic illnesses, her suicide attempts, and her car accidents were all staged to manipulate Julian's attention whenever he seemed to be drifting back to me. "Do you have any regrets?" the judge asked. Chloe looked up, her eyes hard and dry. "I only regret that I was too impatient. If I had waited a little longer, until he transferred all his assets to me, I would be long gone. Men are just pawns. It's his fault for being stupid enough to trust me." A gasp of outrage went through the courtroom. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in prison. The sound of the gavel was a final, hollow thud, ending the ambitions of a greedy woman who knew no limits. Julian heard the verdict over the phone from his lawyer while waiting at the airport to return home. He felt no satisfaction, no joy, only a profound emptiness and a chilling fear. The woman he had cherished, for whom he had abandoned his wife in her hour of need, was a venomous snake in human form. He laughed, a bitter, broken laugh. He had won the case, but he had lost at life. A week after returning from Europe, Julian received an express package from a prestigious international law firm. It was delivered directly to his desk, with no return address, only the courier's official seal. He had a feeling it was from me. His hand trembled slightly as he opened the thick envelope. Inside was a complete legal portfolio, transferring the intellectual property rights of all the software, applications, and technological solutions I had developed at Quantum Group. I had previously kept them under my personal name as a safeguard. Now, I was transferring them to him, completely and unconditionally. Tucked inside was a small card. There were no words of blame, no long confessions, just a single, neatly handwritten line. "This is my final gift. Live well and let go of the past." This was my way of cutting the final tie between us. I didn't want him to live with the burden of debt or guilt for using his ex-wife's intellectual property. I was giving it all back so he could stand firmly on his own 2 feet, and so I could move on with a clear conscience. Julian read that line hundreds of times until the words blurred before his eyes. He understood I wasn't just giving him assets, I was teaching him how to let go. My generosity and forgiveness were more painful than any hatred could have been. If I had cursed him, screamed at him, it would have been easier. But my kindness was a gentle, yet brutal finality. It was an invisible wall, preventing him from ever searching for me or disturbing my life again. He placed the card in his desk drawer, where he kept my wedding ring and the few other mementos he had of me. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He realized that loving someone sometimes meant not possessing them, but respecting their choices. I had chosen freedom, and the best thing he could do now was to not be a burden in my new life. He closed his eyes, and a single hot tear traced a path down his cheek. He finally understood that the Quantum Group empire he had so proudly built was, in fact, constructed on the foundation of my intellect and silent sacrifice. Now that I had given it all back, he felt he no longer deserved to be there. One Monday morning, Julian called an emergency board meeting. He walked in without a laptop or files, just a single sheet of paper in his hand. He stood before them, his voice low and devoid of its usual arrogance. "Gentlemen, I am here today to announce my resignation as CEO of Quantum Group. I have retained a top executive search firm to find a professional replacement." The room erupted in shock. An elderly board member stood up. "Julian, what are you doing? The company has just stabilized. You are the soul of this corporation." Julian smiled sadly. "The soul of this corporation left a long time ago. I am just a hollow shell clinging to a past glory. I will retain my shares, but the leadership should go to someone with more heart and vision than I have." His decision was quickly accepted, leaving a wake of regret and speculation. In the following weeks, Julian began the handover process. He stopped attending late-night parties and endless business trips. He sold a portion of his personal shares, amassing a huge amount of cash, but he didn't buy a new supercar or a bigger mansion. He quietly established a scholarship fund called the Ava Grace Foundation, combining my name with the peace he wished for me. The foundation focused on supporting underprivileged students, especially young women, in the field of computer science, and donating computer labs to schools in rural areas. He hoped that somewhere, a talented young woman like me would have her dreams take flight without having to sacrifice her career for family as I had. With every grant he approved, he felt a little lighter, as if sending a belated apology into the void, hoping the wind would carry it to me. While Julian was searching for me in the glittering capitals of Europe, I was living peacefully in a small, sun-drenched town on the Oregon coast. There were no skyscrapers or blaring horns, only the gentle whisper of the ocean waves. I rented a small cottage nestled under a grove of pine trees, with a vibrant bougainvillea bush in the front and a small vegetable garden in the back. I no longer woke up to an alarm clock or urgent calls from clients. I rose with the sun, breathing in the salty sea air. I traded my stiff business suits for comfortable linen clothes and let my skin tan under the sun. My job was no longer glamorous. I opened a small, free after-school class, teaching basic coding to the children of the local fishing community. Their eyes, in their sun-kissed faces, would light up when they first touched a keyboard. I also took on freelance projects for international nonprofits. The income was enough for a simple, fulfilling life. Money was now a means, not an end. I found joy in the smallest things: a quiet dinner of fresh-caught salmon, a long walk on the beach collecting seashells, listening to the old-timers tell stories on a moonlit night. For the first time in 13 years, since I had been swept up in the vortex of ambition and blind love, I felt truly alive. I was no longer a queen in the eyes of the world, nor a pitiful, betrayed wife. I was just Ava, a free woman who loved herself and cherished the present moment. The past was a scar that had healed, leaving behind only the wisdom that made me stronger. Destiny has a funny way of arranging things. One late autumn day, the town mayor came running to my house. "Miss Ava, a charity group from the city is coming this afternoon to donate a whole new computer lab to your class. They said it's from a big foundation, 20 brand new computers." I smiled, happy for the children. I had no idea that the man behind the charity was Julian. His Ava Grace Foundation had, by pure chance, chosen the very school where I was planting seeds of knowledge. That afternoon, a white van pulled up in front of the community hall. I was inside, showing the kids how to boot up a computer, their cheerful laughter filling the small room. Julian stepped out of the van. He wore a simple white shirt and dark trousers, looking older and more subdued than he had a year ago. He walked with the mayor, inspecting the facilities. As he passed by the row of humble classrooms, he suddenly stopped. From inside an open window, a clear, warm voice drifted out, explaining a logic algorithm. "You see, kids, a computer is like life. If you put in the wrong data, you'll never get the right result. To fix the error, you have to go back to the source of the problem." That voice, though carried on the sea breeze, was etched into his soul. His heart hammered against his ribs. He turned and stared at the window. The afternoon sun streamed through, illuminating the profile of the woman at the front of the class. My hair was now cut short, falling naturally to my shoulders. I wore a simple blue sweater, and the smile on my face was radiant and peaceful. It was the smile he had once fallen in love with, the smile he himself had extinguished. Now, it was reborn, more brilliant than ever, but not for him. Julian stood, rooted to the spot, his hands gripping the windowsill, his eyes fixed on me. He was filled with a dizzying mix of elation and unbearable pain. He started to push the door open, to call my name and end the year of agonizing longing, but his hand stopped. He saw the pure joy in my eyes as I praised a young boy for solving a difficult problem. He saw the profound serenity in my posture. If he walked in now, he would be a stone cast into a tranquil pond, shattering the precious peace I had fought so hard to find. He understood that I was truly happy, in a life that had no room for him, his corporate world, or his betrayal. His presence would only reopen old wounds. Loving someone, he realized, wasn't about possessing them. It was about letting them go, about standing back and wishing them peace. He took a step back and whispered to his assistant, "You go in and represent me. Handle the donation. I'll wait in the car. Don't tell anyone I was here." Before he left, he quietly placed a bouquet of white daisies, a flower he had specially brought from the city, on the windowsill of my classroom. When the ceremony was over and the children were cheering around their new computers, I was cleaning up and noticed the bouquet. I froze. I picked them up, the familiar, gentle scent filling my senses and awakening dormant memories. You couldn't find daisies like these on the coast. I looked up, towards the dirt road leading to the main highway. A white van was slowly driving away. Through the tinted glass, I could just make out the silhouette of a man looking back. It was only a glimpse, but my heart fluttered. Not with pain or longing, but with understanding. I knew it was him. He had found me, and he had chosen not to disturb me. The bouquet was his apology, and his goodbye the kindest he could offer. I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile, and hugged the flowers to my chest. The sea breeze blew through my hair, carrying the salty taste of the ocean and limitless freedom. I turned and walked back toward the sound of the children's laughter. Life goes on. He had his career and his penance to find his way, and I had my wide-open sky and a tranquil soul, and that, for us, was the most perfect ending of all.